get us started, Dr. Karen Hacker, the the director of the Allegheny County Health Department, is going to give you all a welcome, and then we'll get going. So thank you again.
Thank you, Kristen. So first of all, I too am quite overwhelmed by the turnout today. This is like fantastic, and I'm sure for those of us who've been working together to see everyone here today really speaks to how much interest there is in these types of things. I think, you know, from someone who's trying to promote communities that are healthy, this is the kind of work that we all need to be doing together. So first of all, I just want to thank all of the partners. There's a lot of folks who've been involved in today's event, and you're going to hear more about them from Kristen when she comes back up. And thanks, everybody. But I certainly want to do that as well. This is the first ever Complete Streets workshop in Allegheny County, and I want to welcome you. Myself and Hannah Hardy, who you probably know, we just attended the American Public Health Association annual conference in Atlanta, and there were a number of programming that was specifically focused on Complete Streets. But I'm happy today to say that I think we have more attendance than they did at any one of their particular sessions. So as you all know, Complete Streets are streets that are designed for everyone. That's young, old, able-bodied, people with disabilities, people who ride the bus, bike, and also take their own car to work or school. They are safe streets, they are active streets, and they are easy to get around. In Allegheny County, Complete Streets is an important part of building a healthy community, and we have a goal of making Allegheny County the healthiest county in the country. We know that here in Allegheny County, as in pretty much the rest of the nation, the leading causes of preventable death are chronic diseases like diabetes, heart disease, strokes, and cancer. We know that if we can reduce the rates of smoking, of obesity, and of physical inactivity, our chances of decreasing those and having folks live healthier lives increase dramatically. So in an effort to improve the overall health outcomes, we currently have kicked off the Live Well Allegheny campaign that started in 2014 with the county executive kicking it off, and we're now up to, I believe, 49 communities that have joined on. So first of all, how many people in the room do you know if your community is part of Live Well Allegheny? All right, thank you. But there's a lot of hands that didn't go up, so that either means you don't know and you are a member, or it means it's time to become a member. One of the things that we've been trying to do is support one another in these efforts, learn from each other in terms of the types of strategies that folks are using, and sometimes even get money and send it out as grants so that individuals and communities and municipal government in particular has an opportunity to surround their residents with healthy options. So at this point in time, we're going to kick off this Complete Streets workshop. I'm going to turn it back over to Kristen, who's going to do the thank yous, I'm told, so I didn't have to memorize all of them, even though I know most of you. And I hope you have a really exciting day and that you take all of these lessons learned and turn them into action at your own communities. Thanks.
So first, I just wanted to start by saying that this planning of this workshop has been a really, really exciting and cool experience as far as cross-organizational collaboration goes. Like I mentioned, we had 11 partners on this, which if any of you have ever planned a meeting, that sounds like a real nightmare, because it can be, and it just wasn't. All of our partners, Allegheny County Health Department, Allegheny County Economic Development, American Heart Association, American Planning Association, Pennsylvania Chapter, Bike Pittsburgh, Pittsburgh Community Reinvestment Group, Port Authority of Allegheny County, Southwestern Pennsylvania Commission, WalkWorks, and LGA, the Local Government Academy, who reached out to offer to video record this session for us, really just came to the table excited to talk about this, excited that we were willing to kind of use our convening powers to do this. So I just wanted to thank all of you so much, because we couldn't have done this without you, and we wouldn't have wanted to. I also have to give a quick thank you to my colleague Lindsay Angelo, who's sitting over here. She planned all the logistics of this whole thing, and as the person who used to do all of that, I have to say it's a huge job and it's hard, and I really appreciate it. So I want to give Lindsay a hand. So what really brings us here today is the members of Connect. If any of you aren't aware of what Connect is, that's fine. We're not insulted. We're happy to share that Connect is a member organization, and our members are local governments. So the city of Pittsburgh and 39 municipalities that directly surround the city. And what we do is we get our members together on a monthly basis, and we talk about common issues that are of concern to our membership. And I like to think that our members are usually ahead of the curve and ahead of the game, because they really are. At our first ever Congress in 2009, we passed a resolution around green infrastructure for sewers, which I thought, based on what's happened since, was pretty good. And actually, in 2015, our membership passed a resolution committing to working with partner organizations to advance complete streets in municipalities. So it took us 2.5 years, but here we are, and we're really excited to be sort of moving that forward. And I wanted to also, before we move on to the actual meat of this, I always say I'm not the expert, I'm just the person that brings the experts here. I wanted to share a photo. Some of you might have seen this last week. I would assume more of you have than the average person, but I saw this in the Post-Gazette last week, and it just struck me. This is a photo from the Pittsburgh Press in 1951, and the caption says, "Mothers and children blocked the Rinked Bridge to protest the lack of sidewalks in 1951. No sidewalk, no traffic was their demand." So I saw this, and I read a little more. This $8 million bridge was going to open on this day. And these women who, apparently at the time there was usually one-car families, the dad would take the car, the women would be left with the kids, they were like, no, you're not going to do this because we need sidewalks to be safe. So they got their chairs and their strollers, and they went and they sat down and they said, we're not moving. The actual quote that I like from one of the women was, "We've been eating dust and living in mud for 2 years. We want sidewalks before the bridge is opened. We don't want our kids to get killed." So these women, they made a human barricade, and back in these days, I think, well, I won't get into things that we're seeing these days, but the folks in charge did not want the PR nightmare of the photos of them dragging these women and children off the bridge. And what ended up happening is these women won. They had negotiations, and 10 days, the bridge was supposed to open that day. The celebration was canceled, and instead, it was open 10 days later. The women got their sidewalks, and generations of families, I think, probably really appreciated what they did here. But I think seeing this and reading about this, I think we all know that there has to be a better way than this. And for the municipal folks in the room, we know that none of you want your residents to do this in order to get sidewalks. So what we're really talking about here is complete streets. It's planning for the different populations that are going to use a roadway. So had the planners thought about the fact that families use this bridge to walk their kids in strollers, this would never have happened, and it probably would have been planned that way in the first place. So that's why we're here. And I also know that the term complete streets, I've been talking about it for a while and learning about it. It sometimes elicits a lot of grumbles from a lot of various populations. I think some planners say, well, duh, this is how planning should go. And, some people say, oh, that's just the bike people that want bike lanes. So I'm hoping that today we can sort of dispel some of the myths about complete streets and talk about why it really is a policy that people should be passing and, a planning that people should be doing. And I do just have to say that when I actually posted this on Connect's Facebook page last week, so follow us if you don't. But the most Pittsburgh thing ever happened. I posted this photo, and the mom of one of my high school friends who follows Connect because she loves me, not because she really, is that into intergovernmental cooperation, saw the post and commented that she said, oh, that's my mom. And oh my gosh, that's my sister. And then like 2 hours later, she was like, oh my gosh, that's me in the stroller. So that's her, that's Adele. And then, 2 hours later, someone else chimed in. So I just have to say a quick thank you to Mrs. Cutnow, the Rouse sisters, Mrs. Steele, Dorothy Martin, Mrs. Nagy, Aunt Josie, Mrs. Berlinger, and Adele, who are all up here. And, all have relatives that are still here and still paying attention to the news. So all I wanted to say is really, let's try to learn from the past. You know, we don't want to see this because we don't want this to be necessary. And let's just plan a little better. So today we have a really awesome slate of presenters for you who are going to take you all the way through Complete Streets 101. What is it? What are we talking about? Through crafting an ordinance, procuring funding, passing the policy, and then, you know, Complete Streets, what does that actually mean? You know, I understand what it means to pass the policy, but what does it mean after you do that and what comes next? So without further ado, I'm going to hand this over to the people that actually know this information and what they're talking about more than I do. So let's get started. Our first panel, I'd like to welcome Eric Boerer, the Advocacy Director of Bike Pittsburgh, Hannah Hardy, Program Manager at the Allegheny County Health Department, and Ann Ogoreuc, Manager of Transportation Initiatives, Allegheny County Economic Development. Thanks again for being here.
How's this work? Okay. Perfect. Good morning. Thanks for that picture. I don't even need to give a presentation now. So that basically is the presentation. My name is Eric Boerer. I'm the Advocacy Director of Bike Pittsburgh, the bike people, I guess, as Kristen referred to us as. I am coming at this from an advocate's perspective, obviously. But what I'm going to go into briefly is sort of an intro of what Complete Streets is, the basics, as well as a bit about our experience working with the city of Pittsburgh to pass a Complete Streets policy, and one of the better ones in the nation. Oops, there we go. You have to have the picture of the really wide streets, which we don't have in Pittsburgh, but there is no better way to demonstrate exactly what it is than some of these pictures that are up here. So in the winter of 2016, Pittsburgh Mayor Bill Peduto turned the city's planning and transportation world a bit on its head when Council passed a Complete Streets resolution. While the effects of the policy are not immediate, this path to incremental change will no doubt benefit generations to come. However, I still get the sense that a lot of people that I talk to, even in our transportation world, don't really quite understand what Complete Streets means beyond a buzzword. I've heard a lot of misunderstandings, misinformation being spoken, even by those using the term. Hopefully this presentation will clear some things up and turn you guys into Complete Streets advocates yourselves. Our streets and towns are an important part of our community and are often the largest tract of publicly owned land in any municipality. They allow children to get to school, parents to get to work. They bring together neighbors and draw visitors to businesses. These streets should be designed for everyone, whether young or old, foot or on bicycle, in a car or in a bus, but too often they're designed only for speeding cars and creeping traffic jams, which we're all familiar with. In short, everybody, regardless of who they are, where they live, or how they get around, should have the choice to travel in a safe and convenient manner. That's sort of like the basic philosophy of Complete Streets. This simple vision, though, will require those who are making decisions about our transportation network to plan ahead and put the policies in place to ensure it. So in communities across the country, a movement is growing to, quote-unquote, complete the streets. States, cities, and towns are asking their planners and engineers to build roads that are safer and more accessible and easier for everyone. In the process, they are creating better communities for people to live, work, play, and shop. Complete streets are for everyone. They're designed and operated to enable safe access for all users, pedestrians, bicyclists, motorists, public transit users, delivery vehicles, you name it. Of all ages and abilities are able to safely move along and across a complete street corridor. Often you may hear people refer to this as an 880 city, basically that our streets should be usable for 8-year-olds and 80-year-olds, but I think 80, Complete streets make it easy to cross the street, walk to shops, bike to work. They can help buses run on time, make it safe for people to walk to and from stops and stations. They helped me get here this morning. In contrast, incomplete streets, those designed with only cars in mind, limit transportation choice by making anything but the car inconvenient, unattractive, and too often straight up dangerous. You might notice that there's a goat path sort of on the right in the grass there that leads to a bus stop, clearly showing that there are people trying to walk along this road. This is Sawmill Run Boulevard, Route 51. In a study that Bike Pittsburgh published earlier this year, we found that approximately 25% of all traffic fatalities inside Pittsburgh, about 16% in Allegheny County, are pedestrians, which is kind of was a shocking result for, for us to realize as well. So a full quarter of Pittsburgh traffic fatalities are pedestrians. So Pittsburghers, we want choices. Our county has good transportation bones, and we have a large network of sidewalks, slow, narrow streets, and density, resulting in a healthy mix of active transportation. However, pedestrian and bicycle injuries continue to climb, buses must still sit in traffic, and our air quality is, as we all know, not so great. And there are major gaps in the network. Some new developments and road projects have the potential to exacerbate these gaps. Here you can see some quick stats about Pittsburgh and Allegheny County's commuter share. Despite the large number of people choosing active transportation, we still end up with places like this. For example, the road design around the newish Target in East Liberty has been a sore spot within the community. You can almost, I think the Rankin Bridge example from earlier could be pretty similar to this. This actually led to protests because neighbors feel that they can't navigate the new intersection safely by foot, despite the transportation station across the street. So now the city must look for money to correct the problem that they could have solved with a fix-it-first approach and getting it right from the start. You might notice that there's a bicyclist riding on the sidewalk up right by the corner there. And just one other quick thing, this is actually a promotional photo for the area. So this is, in short, that's basically what Complete Streets is about. The Rankin Bridge example, that intersection. Making sure our transportation network works for all users every time there's a new project or regular maintenance. This means that every transportation project will make the street network better and safer for everyone. Complete Streets policies formalize a community's vision to plan, design, operate, and maintain the streets so they're safe for all users of all ages and abilities. The way I like to put it is that it puts the onus on these decision makers to show why all modes can't be accommodated, as opposed to the community needing to prove why the accommodation is necessary. So we don't have to have, a group of mothers shutting down the street, the bridge. Additionally, many municipalities have PennDOT roads that often run through their central business district. Adopting a Complete Streets policy will make sure that other agencies look into a community's vision and plan. In other words, it can give a municipality a tool when dealing with an organization like PennDOT, for instance. Without a policy, bicycle, pedestrian, and public transit accommodations are often debated too late in the design process and are considered a disruption rather than necessary beneficial project feature. This creates an expensive design revision, time delays, and an erosion of public support, and possible last-minute wrestling matches or mothers sitting across the bridge. Just really quickly, I want to dispel some misinformation and talk about what Complete Streets are not. Complete Streets are not about a special project. It's about changing the way we think about transportation projects in general. It's not a specific design element. This may be weird coming from a bike advocate, but not every complete street needs to have a bike lane on it, for instance. Implementation of Complete Streets is flexible and context sensitive and you should be thinking about a corridor. Adopting a policy doesn't mean all roads have to be changed all at once. Changes can be made incrementally and done along with routine maintenance. And Complete Streets won't address all concerns, which will still need attention. These policies are one important piece to ensuring our states are fiscally and physically healthy. So nationwide, more than 200 policies were in place by the end of 2010, with nearly 80 adopted that year alone. The first time I gave this presentation in 2013, when we were trying to push for a policy in Pittsburgh, there were just over 600 policies. So in the past 4 years or so, there were 600 policies. By the end of 2016, which is the latest figures we have, there's 1,232 municipalities, states, and planning agencies that have passed Complete Streets policies. Basically 33 state governments, 77 regional and metropolitan planning organizations, 955 individual municipalities now have Complete Streets policies in place. These policies can take many forms, but more on that in a minute. In many cases, full policy implementation requires changes and updates to plans, guides, zoning, processes so that they're aligned with these high-level direction of the policy. Here in Pennsylvania, in the Northeast, Pennsylvania has been slow to adopt complete streets policies. This might be an older map because I think there are more policies than this right here that's on here right in here. But Philadelphia and Franklin, PA were the first municipalities nearly a decade ago, but there's been very slow statewide growth since. Surrounding states have really taken a lead on this initiative. Most notably, you can almost see New Jersey with the number of complete streets policies they've passed. The movement is also not limited to states or large cities. Communities of all sizes find these policies valuable. More than 1/3 of all policies were adopted in suburban communities of fewer than 30,000 residents. Small towns, often in rural areas, are well represented, with nearly 1 in 5 of all complete streets policies being adopted in these jurisdictions. These policies are in place at nearly all levels of government. So what does a policy look like? Is it just a statement? Policies can take many forms. They can be from simple resolutions to detailed transportation master plans, changes in zoning or design manuals. While there's no one way to create a quote-unquote cookie-cutter policy, most cities start by framing complete streets through legal ordinance, resolution, and/or executive order. The day-to-day decisions that community leaders will be making in the funding, planning, design, maintenance, and operations should align to these goals. For instance, in Pittsburgh, Mayor Bill Peduto started with an executive order in 2015, which basically directed his staff to think about complete streets as they do their work, and then in 2016 was able to pass a resolution through council to provide a policy with some teeth. These are living documents that can be added to as needed and improve the overall impact of the policy. So the concept of complete streets is simple and inspiring, I think, but the best policies do more than simply affirm support for complete streets. Ideal policies will refine a vision, provide clear direction and intent, and complement community needs while also granting flexibility. There's a spectrum of good and bad complete streets policies. Some are simply a statement with no teeth, while others may change the zoning or the tax code, or create an official advisory committee, like the city of Pittsburgh is doing. Smart Growth America's National Complete Streets Coalition scores every complete streets policy enacted based off of 10 policy elements, which might be changing in the next month. The jump drive that everybody has the latest version of the top complete streets policies of 2016 on it. Policies are graded on a scale of 1 to 100, with Indianapolis, Pittsburgh, Baltimore, and New Orleans serving as examples of high-ranking large cities. Each year they publish the best complete streets policies of the year, like I said, which are on should be on your jump drive. And I think it's one of the better documents out there to help understand complete streets, find comparable municipalities, and study their policies. Just for sake of where Pittsburgh lies, in 2016, our complete streets resolution scored a 92 on the scale of 100, which is actually one of the highest ranking of any big city. Like I said, they're going to be changing that soon, some of those exact requirements. Next month, they're actually going to be hosting a webinar to explain the new changes, but I think for our intentions, for the most part, we can still stick with these 10 policy elements that you want to make sure are in your policy. And with that, I'm going to pass it to Anne.
Good morning. For those of you that don't know me, I'm Ann Ogoreuc. I'm the Manager of Transportation Initiatives in the Planning Division at Allegheny County Economic Development. Hannah and I are super pleased to be a part of this workshop today to share with you the many benefits of complete streets policies and efforts and how this concept is important to accomplishing county goals for land use, transportation, and health. So I will get started with some of the transportation and economic development benefits, many of which Eric has done a good job already of introducing. First, by providing complete streets, we improve the reliability, capacity, efficiency, and utilization of the existing multimodal transportation system. So I think most of us would agree that many of our roads in our region are already congested, and we're hoping in the future there's some population growth that will come to the county. So if we're already congested and we're going to get more population, we hope, coming in, we're not going to be able to build our way out of that congestion or expand our roadway systems in any real meaningful way. So sometimes a simple rearrangement of the traffic network or a street or a network of streets can improve traffic flow and improve bicycle and pedestrian usage of our roadway system. Complete streets also improves accessibility to public transit and makes it a more attractive choice for users. Sidewalks and bus stops are important for transit users, and bike lanes coupled with our bike racks on buses can extend the reach of transit services as well and make it more effective and efficient. The transportation options afforded through complete streets can reduce household expenses for transportation. It saves money on parking, vehicle ownership, insurance and maintenance, and so forth. You'll come across different studies that say transportation expenses can be anywhere from 20 to 50% of household income expenditures. So one study I saw said that, in communities where transportation options are available, that can come down to 14 or 15% of a total household expenditure. And then, as Eric mentioned, complete streets enhances mobility for all ages and abilities. Especially for folks, populations like our senior citizens, it can really help them remain active in their communities, reduce the social isolation, again, help them be active and more participatory in their community for a longer amount of time. One that's really important to me is the ability of our children to walk and bike to school. My daughter walks to school every day, and I think it's really important as a part of developing their maturity and independence, if that's something that they can do, or walk to parks or other destinations. And then it helps to remove barriers for persons with disabilities, providing them access and mobility, improving independence, and decreasing reliance on services. So when we can make our bus stops and sidewalks accessible for persons with disabilities, they can have greater opportunities for utilizing our public transit system, which can be, the fixed route system can be more convenient and less expensive than using the complementary paratransit system that many have to rely on. And then there are also a number of potential economic benefits. There's a growing number of studies that find residential, office, and commercial property values benefit when there are nearby investments in bicycle, pedestrian, and transit infrastructure. And realtors are finding that walkability and access to transit are attractive to home buyers. And then there's also the benefits a community can realize from tourism-related expenditures when a community can connect to their trail system or regional trail systems or regional multimodal systems. In 2014, the Friends of the Riverfront they found that the Three Rivers Heritage Trail system generates about $8 million a year in annual economic benefits from its users. The money that they spend when they're using the trail system and buying lunch or buying spare parts for the bike or getting bike repairs or buying new bikes. The Trailtown program similarly found when they did a survey of their users that 82% of users along the Trailtown corridor seek out local businesses, cafes, restaurants, shops, and spend an average of $10 a day on food and snacks. And then, as Eric mentioned, Complete Streets policy, it establishes your policies and plans, establish your vision for Complete Streets, how and why you want that, and how you will accomplish it. And so it can demonstrate your intent to your residents as to how and why the concept will be applied, as well as to your staff through enforcing ordinances, developing new policies, and so forth. And it can communicate your intent to your developers that their proposed projects will include active transportation elements or complete streets elements. And finally, it demonstrates your intent or your purpose to other roadway owners, such as PennDOT and the county, who have roads in most of your communities. I specifically wanted to mention PennDOT's new initiative called PennDOT Connects. which basically requires PennDOT now, before they even program any transportation dollars for a project or begin design on it, that they have to meet with the local municipality. And so this is an opportunity for the municipality to share with them issues or concerns relating to bicycle and pedestrian access, transit access, even it goes beyond that to stormwater and emergency services. But there are opportunities for these considerations to be integrated into a PennDOT project before it's too late. You're going to have to demonstrate your intent, demonstrate your philosophy or priorities, that these are important issues, and a complete streets policy or plan can play a big role in those discussions. And finally, complete streets policies and plans help to achieve county development goals and the vision, which I will go into here. So I'm sure all of you are familiar with Allegheny Places, the county's comprehensive plan. I'll just touch on a few things. Outreach during the planning process for that effort, and even though this was 8 or 10 years ago, demonstrated a strong support for creating and maintaining bikeable and walkable communities in the county. And the transportation element of that plan identified several specific bicycle and pedestrian goals to connect people to jobs, support mobility, provide access, and provide multimodal connectivity. And so there was so much interest in that idea that one of the first implementation activities that came from from Allegheny Places was to put together an active transportation plan. And the goal and the objective of the plan basically came straight from Allegheny Places. The goal being to integrate non-vehicular modes of transportation into the transportation system, with the objective to accommodate and encourage walking and biking as an integral part and common means of getting around Allegheny County. The plan has several components, and if you aren't familiar with it yet, it's on your thumb drive, so you can go home and take a look at it. It's got several chapters. It's got a chapter just on bicycle issues. There's the walk and roll, which deals with pedestrian and access for persons with disabilities. And each of the components identifies potential local improvements that could be made. And I like to refer to this kind of as a starting point. If you're going to be considering bicycle and pedestrian improvements or planning, kind of use this as a starting point to see if anything was identified through that planning process for your community, and then build on that and do more research into what your community needs are. And then just as important, I think, as that aspect of it is that it's just a really good toolkit. If you're kind of just beginning to become aware of bicycle and pedestrian issues, it's a really great toolkit, I think, for providing an understanding of the different planning and design considerations. So if you're not really sure what the difference is between a protected bike lane, shared lanes, or a multi-use path, we have all these things spelled out along with some basic design considerations. And then there's also a whole chapter on complete streets, a little bit of a primer for that if you want to take a look at that after you leave today. That chapter includes a model policy that was developed as a part of the planning process, which you can take home and adopt or consider adopting a form of that in your community. And I believe that's in front of you all on the table today as well. Finally, I just wanted to highlight some initiatives that the county is undertaking right now to be a partner in helping you achieve some of your complete streets goals. First, over the past few years, the county has been active in making some bicycle and pedestrian improvements on the roadway system that we own and control. So, for example, bike lanes were installed on the Roberto Clemente Bridge, which provides a connection in the city's bike system. On Corrigan Drive in South Park, we were able to do a road diet, which reduced the roadway to 2 through traffic lanes, which provided space for a protected bike lane on both sides of the road. On Neville Island, we were able to install bike lanes on Neville Road and shared lane markings across Grand Avenue, which is going to provide, it provides a nice connection now, but ultimately it's going to connect to the Montour Trail in Coraopolis. And then finally, right now in design, we have bike lanes along Pierce Mill Road in North Park. Those are, like I said, in design now, and it will ultimately complete the loop around North Park and provide access to the neighboring communities. And then, with all the activity in the city, and we're starting to make these improvements on our roadway system now, we were starting to get requests from municipalities. Would you consider doing such and such on a road, or installing certain signage to help with your initiatives? And we didn't have a good way of either evaluating those requests or prioritizing them in any way. So in partnership with the Public Works Department, we're doing an in-house study of all 400 miles of our county-owned roadway system, looking for what space might be available within that roadway system for making bicycle and pedestrian improvements. So we might identify another opportunity for a road diet, like we did in South Park, or another opportunity where a roadway has capacity for bike lanes and so forth. And ultimately, when this is all compiled, we're going to provide it to all of our municipalities through our website, and that will be a great starting point if you're doing a complete streets plan or an active transportation plan. It's going to be data that's going to be available to you right away for your use. And finally, I just want to mention the Active Allegheny Grant Program. Thanks to a great partnership with the Health Department and the R.K. Mellon Foundation, we created the Active Allegheny Grant Program 2 years ago, really with the idea of helping to bring about implementation of the Active Allegheny Plan, helping our municipalities assess their multimodal needs, and then begin moving towards implementation. Many of these ideas are for planning and design that we can fund through the Active Allegheny Program, can later be funded through other funding sources that we'll talk about. So more than $300,000 has been awarded so far through the program for municipal bicycle and pedestrian planning and design efforts, and events and educational events such as open streets. And so far we've supported 14 projects in 20 municipalities, with projects ranging from community active transportation complete streets plans, intersection redesigns, community connectors to regional trail systems, corridor designs, and like I said, open street events. So also included in your materials are the program guidelines for Active Allegheny from the most recent funding cycle that has passed. And you can use that as a guide if you want more information about the program and what it funds. I don't expect it will change very much before the next cycle opens in the spring. But if you have any questions, you can see me today or give me a call. And with that, I'll turn it over to Hannah.
Thanks. I'm really excited to be here, everyone. I did just get to hear, Eric highlighted some work that's going on across the country, and I just think this is so exciting what we're doing here today, and the response is wonderful. So I'm very excited to be here. My name is Hannah Hardy. I work here at the Allegheny County Health Department, and welcome to Hosanna House. It may be my fault that you're here because my office is here and I love this building, so thank you for coming here. We appreciate you coming to Wilkinsburg and enjoying, if you haven't been here yet, getting to see this beautiful facility. So one thing that Dr. Hacker, I'm the manager for the Chronic Disease Prevention Program here at the Health Department, and so what we are all about is really something that Dr. Hacker mentioned. There are three main behaviors that we all have: the way that we eat, how physically active we are, and our smoking rates, that contribute to the four main chronic diseases that really are responsible for over 50%. In Allegheny County, it's more like 70% of the leading causes of death. So if you think about, nationwide and across the world, actually it's like 50%, but here in Allegheny County, we really struggle in terms of our health outcomes. And so the main point is that there are things that we can all do that will impact the health of Allegheny County residents. So this is just some of the leading causes of death here in Allegheny County. I do have to bring it home. We hear a lot about obesity rates. We just completed in 2016, and the data is all available on our website, the Allegheny County Health Survey. The big takeaway for that related to obesity and our rates of overweight and obesity is that we haven't, with all the good work that's being done in Allegheny County, we have not seen a reduction in our obesity and overweight rates. We're at about 65%, and that has not gone down at all. So that's kind of the big message that I have here, is that we still have a lot of work to do. Related to chronic diseases, we track, particularly when you compare us with national statistics, we track a little bit higher than other parts of the country. So that's something for us to be aware of. So we all know the health challenges from obesity, lack of physical activity, other different health concerns. But what can we do about it? I think part of the reason that we're all here today is because there is something that we can all do about it, and that is to get moving. We know that if our life expectancy really increases measurably if we can all increase our physical activity. So we see Complete Streets as a way to do that, and wanted to bring that important message here today. So, again, we're focused on this piece, in terms of the 3 modifiable behaviors, we're focused on the physical activity piece of this. Dr. Hacker mentioned the vision, and Eric talked about vision. Here in Allegheny County, we have set a vision to make Allegheny County the healthiest county in the nation. So what we're trying to do is to get every municipality in Allegheny County to agree to be a Live Well community. Many folks are here today. If you're here today, chances are good that we would want you to become a partner with us with Live Well Allegheny, which is our countywide health and wellness campaign. There are a lot of opportunities, and really Complete Streets are a tool for all of us to reach that goal. So how do Complete Streets encourage physical activity? We know that residents are 65% more likely to walk in a neighborhood that has sidewalks that are usable. Individuals in walkable communities really did measurable amounts more of physical activity per week than those in communities that were not defined as walkable. Every additional kilometer walked is associated with a 5% decrease in risk for obesity. I also want to highlight, and Eric highlighted some of the other public health benefits to Complete Streets. I'm certainly not an air quality expert or working in our environment program, but certainly there is a benefit to reducing traffic emissions. And safety is a real public health concern. The statistics that Eric mentioned in terms of the pedestrian fatalities and incidents here in Allegheny County is really a concern for us. And I do have 2, I'll just have them raise their hands. Nicole and Brianna, we have a traffic safety education, are in the back of the room. We at the health department have a traffic safety education project program here. So if you have an organization, if you're looking for, we're committed to that. And if you are looking for that type of information in terms of health education, we have resources available to you, but that's a real area of concern and a real opportunity for Complete Streets to impact that very serious public health concern that we have. So I think that we see Complete Streets policies as a tool to encourage people to make healthy choices. If we can, as Anne said, lay the groundwork and set the vision, then things like implementation with PennDOT and all those other things will follow. Our goal is to make the healthy choice the easy choice for Allegheny County residents. I appreciate everyone being here today, and we really see this as a great tool to get us to where we want to go. I think with that, we have time for questions. Are you coming back up? Great.
Yeah, so up next, we're going to introduce our keynote speaker who's here today, and then he's going to join our panel, and then we're going to do questions for the group afterwards. So I wanted to introduce Mr. Robert Bini, who drove in last night from Lancaster County. When we were doing our planning, we were kind of sitting around going, well, who is actually doing this, and what does that actually mean, and who's doing it well? And we found Robert. So we're really excited to hear from him. Robert is the Director for Transportation Planning for Lancaster County, PA. In this role, he oversees activities of the Lancaster County MPO and coordinates the transportation component of the Lancaster County Comp Plan. He works to ensure that the county's transportation plans, programs, and projects will meet the future needs of a growing and diverse community. And we're really excited and hoping to understand more about what is happening in Lancaster that is basically making the news and is why we found him and brought him here. So welcome, Robert. Thank you for coming.
Thank you so much. Good morning, everybody.
Good morning.
I appreciate the opportunity to be here. I hope that our reputation that precedes us, I hope I can live up to that this morning in terms of describing for you complete streets in Lancaster County. And I guess I better... There we go. First of all, I've been with Lancaster County about a year and a half now, so a lot of what you're going to hear me talk about happened prior to the time I arrived at Lancaster County. But on one hand, I think that gives me a good opportunity in some ways to make an assessment of what we've been able to accomplish and perhaps where we need to be going in the future. By the time I get to the end, maybe you can share with me some of your thoughts about whether or not you think we've been successful, and if not, what we ought to be doing going forward. Prior to coming to Lancaster County, I worked with the Federal Highway Administration, the Office of Planning, Environment, and Realty, which was in fact the office that generated a lot of the information and developed an initiative to advance walkability and bikeability in the Federal Highway Administration, which, if you know the history of the Federal Highway Administration, it's not hard to imagine that that was an automobile-oriented agency for most of its history. So there have been tremendous advances at that level of government, and I think that you can see is making its way down to activities at the local level, and maybe in fact has been influenced by a lot of things happening at the local level. But I've worked in local government, county and regional government, and left the Federal Highway Administration largely for one reason, because I got tired of 5-hour commutes to D.C. every day. So I'm happy to be in Lancaster County, and I'm happy to be here to talk about what we're doing. I have 3 objectives today. The first one is simply to describe our complete streets experience. The second is it's created an opportunity for introspection on our part. So that's part of the reason why I say as I go through this presentation, it's a little bit of self-criticism maybe in terms of some of the things that we've done. But it's an opportunity for me to learn from all of you. So as we go forward through the rest of the day, I'm looking forward to that opportunity. So, what is Lancaster County? It's a growing county of over 534,000 people, and by the year 2040, we expect to have to accommodate at least another 100,000 people, and that's a number on the low end, I guess. We've used higher numbers over the last couple of years in terms of the projections that we've made for the county, but it's scared the community, so we've had to back off in public discussions about what that number represents. About half of that number of 100,000 will be in-county growth as opposed to people moving into the county, so it's the current residents having children and the county continuing to grow. Lancaster County is a county on the rise. The city of Lancaster has showed tremendous resurgence. It's a city that, like a lot of urban areas, was suffering from decline, but more recently been able to attract businesses, younger people moving in. It's a tremendous art scene, restaurants and nightlife, and it's the character in the last 5 to 10 years has totally changed, and the city is on the rebound. In the county as a whole, we have 60 municipalities. They vary and range from the city of Lancaster to the most rural communities that you might imagine. But in the context of that, we also have over a dozen older boroughs that are also enjoying a resurgence. So places like Lidditz, Ephrata, Mannheim, you may know the names of some of those places. But there's a lot of focus on continuing to allow those communities to be vibrant, and part of what makes them vibrant is the complete streets environment that we're able to create and maintain in those locations. And it's a tremendously active county. We have a trail system that's been 30 years in the making. We're We're finally seeing some of those trails being fully realized. So if you get a chance to go to Lancaster County and experience the Northwest River Trail, the Enola Low-Grade Trail, the Lidditz to Warwick Trail, you'll find that there are really some nice places we've been able to create. So that's a little bit about Lancaster County. What I'd like to move to is, and you've heard this in the comments of the panelists before me. There are going to be some themes that you'll see repeated in my presentation because we think they're important parts of what you need to hear. As Eric said, good policy can take many forms. So you have ordinances and resolutions, you have design manuals, comprehensive plans, executive orders that government might issue, all of which can contribute to policy, or good policy. So what I'd like to focus on for Lancaster County is to talk about the plans, policies, programs, and projects that we think have contributed to the development of our Complete Streets program. And we've exercised several of the options I mentioned to create what we think is a good policy foundation. So I'll take a few minutes to run through that, and hopefully at the end you'll be able to see how they fit together to define our program. First, we have a variety of plans. This is just a small selection of what you might find if you looked around the county. I'm going to talk in a minute about Places 2040, which is the current update of our comprehensive plan that will continue to maintain policies that support the kinds of things we do in Complete Streets. Similarly, last fall we adopted an update to our county's long-range transportation plan. That's Connection 2040. So those are examples of plans at the county level. We're currently developing an active transportation plan. So again, the kind of thing that bringing health into the planning picture. I think in our update of our long-range transportation plan was the first time we actually added a component related to health and transportation in an effort to try to emphasize that more. And naturally, that's important in the context of Complete Streets. The active transportation plan that we're developing is a multi-level plan, so it's going to have a component at the county level that will describe a network of pedestrian and bicycle environment for the county as a whole, policies that should guide decision-making for our municipalities around the county. Then there is a component related to what we call the Lancaster Intermunicipal Committee that's referenced in the next plan, Growing Together. There'll be a component of that, of the plan that essentially encompasses the urban core that surrounds the city of Lancaster. There are 9 municipalities that are a cog, and they're developing what will be a slightly more focused component of the plan. And then there is a plan for the city of Lancaster, which is highly detailed, very fine-grained plan with a lot of detail that is going to help the city continue to implement their Complete Streets program. Growing Together, I mentioned the LIMC is an intermunicipal comprehensive plan. So the 9 municipalities developed a plan that mirrors a lot of the things that are in the county's plan, but obviously gets more specific as you talk about an area like that. And there are things in that plan that support Complete Streets. I'm going to talk a little bit later about the Route 30 Streetscape Plan. The plan was developed as a partnership among the township within which this streetscape resides, the county, and PennDOT. So this is an interesting example of a plan that's laid the foundation for some additional things the township can do to implement Complete Streets. And then, of course, you have municipal comprehensive plans. So as you develop those plans, you should recognize the importance of having elements in there that are going to support Complete Streets. And I'll talk a little bit more about that, again, in the context of PennDOT Connects that you mentioned, because that does carry some importance. Okay, so let me talk just a minute about Places 2040. This is in Lancaster County, we have a long history of what I would call sound comprehensive planning. The issues that you'll see that we're trying to address in Places 2040 represent the classic struggle between urban and rural, because Lancaster County is a place that was an early adopter of growth management. We have, since the previous two plans in our county comprehensive plan, have had urban growth boundaries, which continue to represent a struggle in terms of that additional 100,000 people that we're going to find a way to accommodate. So that balance between maintaining agriculture and accommodating development is a difficult one. But agricultural preservation continues to be a strong priority for the county in terms of its comprehensive plan. And the Lancaster Farmland Trust is among the most successful in the nation at preserving agriculture. There are 484 farms that have been preserved in Lancaster County, and it represents almost 30,000 acres of land preserved since 1988. Now, in developing the plan, which has been a year and a half to this point in development, we've had, I think, one of the most successful efforts at involving the community in developing the plan that we've ever had. There have been over 6,000 people who have participated in one form or another in online surveys, meetings, and I don't know whether 6,000 is a big number for you folks or not, but compared to previous efforts at plan development, we probably would have been hard pressed to say we had attracted 1,000 people. So it's been a really big an encouraging situation for us in terms of the level of involvement. And we've also developed a group of stakeholders in the community that we call Partners for Place, so involving the business community, the health community, neighborhoods, the housing folks, so just a broad range of stakeholders who have really bought into what we're trying to do with the comprehensive plan. But out of all that public input, we've culled these 8 themes that represent the priority for Lancaster County's future. And you can see in here, when we talk about managing growth, urban places, housing and employment, a lot going on the kind of the urban and suburban side of the way the county is going to change. But in terms of agriculture, parks and open space, again, representing that balance that we want to try to maintain in the county. But in the heart of all that, you also see transportation. And so there's a context there that is provided for complete streets. So out of all of those priorities for the county, they're reflected in what we think are our core values, and the plan will be developed around these core values. They continue to drive the planning effort. So when you talk about community, connection, stewardship, and identity, those things are what we think represent Lancaster County. And after all of that stage setting, the writing of the plan is now taking place, and it's going to be structured around these 3 themes, with the byline for the plan of thinking beyond boundaries. So we're talking about communities, corridors, and landscapes, and if you think about complete streets, there are aspects of each of these 3 themes in complete streets. So the focus is on communities. Streets are the corridors that create those connections within the communities, and we're trying to round out the landscape in the way we develop those corridors by doing it in a sensible way. So enough said about the comprehensive plan, but you can see there that I think that we are trying to make a strong foundation, a continuing foundation for complete streets at that very basic level. As a component of implementation of the plan, we've developed what we call a transect. The transect sets the physical context for development. And you can see, I don't know if you can see the dot on the pointer, but it goes from natural areas on the left through agriculture, rural centers, suburban, all the way over to the most urban core area. Starts to define physically how you might relate different types of improvements to the physical context of your community. And this plays on the theme, I think, that Eric mentioned, which is not one size fits all when it comes to complete streets. So complete streets that will be developed in the context of something like this transect. And you can use a number of means to implement something like the transect. So some of you may have official maps. Those are ways to define elements that will contribute to complete streets. traditional neighborhood development or place-based codes. There are a variety of ways that you implement the transect. You couple that with the road typology in your community. So if you're talking about arterial streets, collector streets, neighborhood or local streets, there's going to be a different set of criteria that are going to apply to those various types of development in your community. So in terms of where we've been and where we'd like to go, the transect has importance. So as I said, you move from more rural to more urban, going from one end to the other, and it sets the context for developing complete streets. Just to touch quickly on some of the things that we're doing in the area of transportation planning that support the Complete Streets effort. We have, as I mentioned earlier, our Connections 2040 is our long-range transportation plan. It lays out the policy basis for what we'd like to do in the community, and I'll talk in a minute about what some of the goals of that plan are. Now, this is the list of goals from the county's long-range transportation plan. I think you can pick out a couple there that are directly applicable to complete streets. So we talk about alternative modes, we talk about social justice and equity, we talk about quality of life and improved health through transportation. All of these things are things that we are setting the policy context for developing complete streets. I don't have a separate slide on the active transportation plan, but I mentioned that earlier. You can see the three partners that are involved in that, and I mentioned some of the details of that. But I wanted to focus a little bit, though, for a minute on PennDOT Connects, which was discussed earlier. Now, before this morning, how many of you had actually heard of PennDOT Connects? All right, well, that's pretty good. Then they're doing a good job of getting the word out about that. Have any of you actually had meetings with PennDOT involving specific projects?
I didn't know that why though.
Ah, okay.
I'm actually shocked.
All right, well,
Pleasantly shocked.
let's talk more about that later. But I think there are two relationships that I think are important maybe for you to know about PennDOT Connects. We serve as staff to the Metropolitan Planning Organization, which I think here we have Southwest Pennsylvania Commission, who's your MPO. And they, I think, would fulfill a similar role. But so we're in the process of developing what's called our Transportation Improvement Program. It's the list that we update every 2 years, as all the projects that we anticipate getting federal and state funding for. PennDOT Connects, one of the focuses of PennDOT Connects will be on scrubbing that list. And for us, it's probably 100 projects long to make sure that each of those projects gets attention in the context of complete streets being one element that can be considered in those discussions. The other place it comes into play, and this is maybe a little bit tougher to get a fix on, is in the maintenance and resurfacing kinds of activities that go on. Each district office in PennDOT has sub-regions that do maintenance projects, but we've been fortunate that our district is willing to share every year a list of the proposed resurfacing projects with us, and we run that list through our Pedestrian and Bicycle Advisory Committee to look for opportunities where, in the course of doing resurfacings, PennDOT might address some issues that relate to complete streets in terms of and there could be a variety of them. It could be pedestrian and bicycle accommodations. It could be stormwater issues. It could be any number of things that the community might identify that need to be addressed. But it's an opportunity for not only local input into that, but what happens in some cases, or we hope will happen, is that indirectly it's going to bring funding to those projects to support some of the things that you want to do. So where a project might have been funded at a basic level in PennDOT's mind, now when we talk about adding some elements, obviously the cost may go up, and PennDOT says they're willing to accommodate that if the community has done its homework and has made the policy case that these things are important to them. So it emphasizes the fact that when we talk about all of these plans, we talk about developing policies, PennDOT's going to want to see done your homework, not only done your homework, but that you were invested as a community in the kind of things that you're going to be asking them to pay for. So this is a little bit of ground that we've been over already, but it's maybe just a little different twist on the 10 elements of what might make for a good complete streets policy. It's taken from the local policy workbook that Smart Growth America developed, but they've categorized the policy elements into 4 categories. So the vision is obviously important. I've spent a little bit of time talking about plans and developing a vision, and you need to be making sure that that's part of what you're doing. Then the 2 interesting aspects here are, I think, representing a core commitment in terms of what your policy is saying. So they categorize 3 of the policy elements as representing the core commitment. So when you talk about addressing all users and all modes, looking at every project for where you might provide complete street solutions, and of course when we talked about that transect and complete streets not necessarily, all elements of complete streets not necessarily being appropriate in all cases, there has to be accommodation for exceptions. And in the area of best practices, Eric went through these earlier. You want to make sure you're talking about a complete network. This is PennDOT Connects, reflects on this all agencies and roads because it's an opportunity for everybody around particular projects to be having a discussion. Context sensitivity is important, and maybe the most difficult one to accommodate, at least for us in our experience, is performance measures. How do you evaluate what you've done, and is it doing what you intended? So now let's talk about the Lancaster experience, finally. Aside from the fact that we've talked a little bit about visions and things, how does that translate into action in terms of complete streets for us? Well, both the Lancaster County Planning Commission and the Lancaster County Transportation Coordinating Committee, which is MPO for short, have both adopted the policy statement that you see reflected there. Now, if you were to compare this policy statement to those 10 elements, I think you can see some of them in the statement. We talk about providing for a core commitment. It addresses all modes, all users, and talks about partner agencies. It doesn't necessarily get into each and every element of what makes a good policy in our policy statement, but it's a pretty good foundational statement for establishment of our program. Now, with that as a basis, there have been a variety of municipal approaches, and I'm going to give you some case examples of that in a couple of minutes. And a handful of our municipalities have adopted policies. So when I say a handful, it's literally a handful. But we have a broad range of things that municipalities have done to implement complete streets without adopting a policy. So I want to talk just for a second about what might be the motivation for adopting a policy, because I think this is something that municipalities, at least in our county, have struggled with. But I think the ones who have chosen to adopt a policy in some respects are the ones who have a good history of doing strong planning. They're a little bit more advanced than some of the other communities in that respect. In some cases, they're part of a broader initiative. As you have here, we have an initiative in our county with involving Lancaster General Health and their Lighten Up Lancaster program, and the Smart Growth Coalition that have coalesced to advocate for complete streets, and some municipalities see the value in that and get on board because of those kinds of efforts. In many cases, though, I think what you see is that our municipalities who have adopted policies recognize the connection between that and the fact that we're a source of funding for projects. So we'll talk a little bit more about that, but we have our typical transportation improvement program, which is where all the community's priority projects are represented. And we have a couple other specific programs that I'll talk about in a minute in terms of providing funding to municipalities. But why would municipalities not be motivated to adopt the policy? And maybe that's something that some of you struggle with. First of all, it's the reason we're here this morning is a lack of understanding about what it really is. Nervousness about committing to something that you don't really understand. I think in some respects we've contributed to our own problem, because you may have heard a number of terms over the years that would represent concepts that are similar to complete streets. So if we talked about smart growth transportation, talk about new urbanism, context-sensitive solutions, or simply active transportation, all those things have been tossed around and contain elements that are similar sometimes to complete streets. And so we throw another one at our folks, and they're too confused to want to commit to something they don't really understand. A third reason why municipalities are hesitant to adopt the policy is that they're afraid that it comes with a cost, that it's committing them to something that will, and it may, require, if it's going to be successful, ongoing expenditures that are too much of an unknown for them to be able to sign off on in that specific a way. On the opposite end of the planning spectrum, the ones who don't have a lot of experience in developing plans and embracing policy decisions of this type, they hesitate to adopt this kind of a policy. And some would say they already have it covered. It's spread here and there in their ordinances, a specific policy, or one of their plans. So we don't really need to adopt the policy. But I think that's, again, in reflecting on Eric's comments earlier, the risk in not having that kind of a focused effort is that, and I'll talk about this in terms of our experience in a minute, you can easily get off track and lose your focus in terms of what it is you're trying to accomplish. So let's talk about the county's Complete Streets program. Not that much different than what's going on in Allegheny County. I think discussions about these kind of things probably started around 2010, but it was 2014 when those policies were adopted and the program actually was formalized in some way. Again, referencing the County Planning Commission, the MPO adopted policies, and at that time supported what they called long-term program implementation. So recognizing that we were going to be in it for the long haul. Here's where we talk about the program partners, Lancaster General Health and the Smart Growth Coalition. And they developed an action plan, which is important, that covered the years from 2014 to 2016. In addition to that, we developed a toolbox for the municipalities and held one workshop every year since 2014. Yet in spite of that, as I mentioned, we only have a handful of municipalities that have actually adopted a policy. So what you may want to take from that is that this is hard work that takes a long time, in terms of continual involvement in what we're trying to accomplish. But for us, it's time to refresh the implementation agenda, because we've worked through some of the things that were on the earlier work plan, but I can't say that we've stuck with it for the long haul, as was suggested by our governing committees. But in spite of that, we've been able to do some good things, and here's where part of the confusion comes in. The source that we have for funding projects that are complete streets in nature comes through what we call our Smart Growth Transportation Program. It's a competitive funding program that's been set up through the MPO. So we take $3 million every 2 years from our transportation improvement program and set that aside for smart growth transportation projects. We have a task force that's set up that evaluates the projects, scores them, and we just made a recommendation to our technical committee yesterday for the projects that are going to be funded in our current round of funding. But one of the things that's important to note is that we award bonus points for projects that are going to address complete streets in some way. So it's an incentive for the municipalities to add those elements to their projects in order to compete effectively for funding. Now, we're in our fourth cycle of the program now. We've provided $8.5 million in funding, which you might recognize we don't necessarily give out the full amount every time because we want the projects to be worthwhile projects that are going to achieve the things that we want them to do. But that $8.5 million has actually leveraged a total investment of $22 million. So between additional public and private resources, it's been quite a successful program in terms of leveraging additional funds toward these kinds of projects. And as long as our coordinating committee doesn't change their mind, we're going to continue to do it into the future. And maybe find ways to add more money to it. I'm not going to go over all these criteria, but this is just a quick look at, you'll have this in the information, the follow-up, the core criteria and weighted criteria that we use to evaluate projects under this program. Again, here you see the theme about plan consistency and things like a viable implementation strategy. We want these projects to be real, so when they come in with an application, they have to demonstrate that they're actually going to be able to finish the project. And in spite of that, we've had projects that have still had a difficult time making their way to completion. But we have a variety, in addition to funding, we've had a variety of tools and resources that we have developed for our communities. I think one of the things that will be on the jump drive is something we call our Complete Streets Guidebook. And I have 3 or 4 copies of it with me today that you're welcome to look at and take home with you if you want one badly enough. But I think it's good. It's a good resource. It does a number of things, similar to what we're doing here today. Explains what Complete Streets is, provides an overview of the whole policy discussion that we've had, defines the process for developing Complete Streets. So if you need a step-by-step guide to get you from start to action, it will help you do that. I mentioned earlier these land use and road context for complete streets, the transect and the road typology. There's a big discussion of that in the guidebook, and it also gives guidance on design. So if you need, if the municipality needs assistance, it provides that kind of a resource. We've also provided to our municipalities model complete streets language that they can use in updating their ordinances. A couple of examples out of these lists. I won't go through every one, but that are important. Defining elements of complete streets. So if you're talking about sidewalks, bicycle lanes, other features that might be part of complete streets, provides what you need for your ordinances in order to be able to accomplish that. Provides the mechanism for making complete streets part of your everyday business, because I think that's part of what our long-term goal is to not have to think twice about complete streets. It simply becomes the normal way of doing business. And you can help that by the way you structure your ordinances. And you can require that every project include complete streets elements. There's no reason that as a local decision-making body that you can't do that. So let's look quickly at some projects, perhaps. The pictures on this slide depict a number of circumstances, and it reflects on a comment I made earlier about what complete streets means in a different context. The first slide on the upper left, for example, in a rural area of Lancaster County, this is a complete street. The buggy, someone walking along the highway, they can do that in a safe manner and accommodate cars at the same time without necessarily having to do anything to this road. If you go to the center example, a location where there's a little more traffic, you need to accommodate, provide some additional accommodation. It's something as simple as providing space on the shoulder to accommodate bicyclists or pedestrians in this particular environment. But then as you move into the more suburban environments, which this slide up on the upper right and the lower left, the situation becomes a little bit different, and we look at a more structured and a more an environment with more elements. So we start adding sidewalks and curbs and doing some other things that represent the context in these situations. And then the last two slides on the bottom right, of course, as you get into a more urban area, you can see the difference in terms of what happens in terms of the level of improvements that you make, where you might have bump outs, the piano key crosswalks and things of that type that are needed in areas of that type to create not only the elements of a complete street, but a safe environment for the people who are going to use the streets. Oops, pressed the wrong button. So I want to just give you a few quick examples of where there have been attempts to implement complete streets in Lancaster County. We'll go through these, but I also want to reflect as I do that on what the context is in which the municipalities made each of these decisions. In this case, we have Lancaster City. They've adopted a complete streets resolution. They have not adopted a complete streets policy. They've chosen to implement complete streets activities through their land development requirements, the Public Works Capital Improvement Program, and in submitting projects for funding through our MPO Transportation Improvement Program. Now here you can see a before and after shot of the same intersection on Mulberry Street in Lancaster City. The project actually involved, while this is focused on the intersection, you can see some of the things that were added. There's a bike lane, the enhanced crosswalks. I think at the same time they were doing ADA improvements to the corners. These areas where the vegetation is are rain gardens that accommodate stormwater. At the lower right corner, it's a little bit hard to see on this picture on the right, are brick pavers that is the area where parking is provided. Again, it's an opportunity to help them deal with their stormwater issues. And what they also did to calm the traffic is change the street from a one-way street on which people continually exceeded the speed limit to a two-way street where they narrowed the travel lanes, added a bike lane, and calmed the traffic. And the situation now, after a year's time of this street in action, is a dramatic difference in terms of what it's done for the neighborhood in terms of improving the quality of life for the residents there. So this is a success built on, I mean, they've accepted the need to have a resolution to support what they're doing, but they've chosen in an implementation environment to do other things and not focus so much on the policies. Now, whether that's a smart thing or not, I don't know, but they're so far having some success. Now, Elizabethtown Borough is a municipality that's kind of at the other end of the spectrum in terms of what they've chosen to do from a policy standpoint. They have a resolution, they have a policy, they're deeply ingrained in the philosophy of complete streets, and it's built into all the decisions that they're making about things that they're doing in the community. In this case, we gave them funding for a portion of this, their pedestrian path system. Interesting thing about Elizabethtown is there's a college there, there's an Amtrak station in the downtown, and what they've done is essentially, it's hard to see on this slide, but at the eastern side of the slide is where the college are, residential neighborhoods in between, downtown and train station on the left side of the slide, but put in this pedestrian path system in order to make it easier for people to move about the community and to be able to get downtown to other places that are desirable. But they're deeply committed at a very fundamental policy level and have been successful in getting grant funding from a number of sources because of that to support the things that they're doing. Now here's an interesting one. I don't know how many of you are familiar with the Route 30 east of Lancaster, where the retail outlets are. It's a heavy tourist area. Draws probably unreasonable levels of traffic, but the township has determined that this environment that has been created there is not desirable, and they would like to do something about that. But have they adopted a resolution? No. Have they adopted a formal policy? No. But they have developed the Route 30 streetscape plan that I mentioned earlier that is designed to fundamentally change what essentially is the main street of the township. So, slide's hard to read, I'm sure, at a distance, but there are a couple things you can point out. They've incorporated green infrastructure into the project. At the intersections, you might be able to see make out the squares there. Those represent enhanced crosswalk treatments that they're going to try to put in at those intersections. And there are green lines along the side of the slide that represent what's on this slide. Now, if you look at the top of the slide, that represents the before condition, and if you look at the bottom of the slide, this is what their intent is in terms of trying to make this more of a complete street. So next summer, this is a good actually predates PennDOT Connects, but is a good example of where the township sitting down with PennDOT is going to help achieve some of this, because this section of Route 30 is going to be repaved in the spring. In the process, PennDOT is simply going to restripe the corridor to narrow all the travel lanes by a foot, give the township an opportunity to do some things along the outside with the additional space in terms of landscaping and other things that they want to do, and begin to possibly transform this corridor into something other than what you saw on the first slide. So we're hopeful that is going to be the first step. At each end of the corridor, the township has developed some pretty elaborate plans for gateway kind of treatment at each end of the corridor, and township has to pay for it, but PennDOT has been willing to incorporate some of that into this resurfacing project that they're going to do next summer. Now here we see an example of what they hope to be. In the case of Ogoreuc Township, they have an area of the township adjacent to the borough of Lidditz where there has been a lot of residential development, and as part of developing this area, the township, they want to do it right in their minds. But again, this is an example where the township has not adopted a resolution, they've not adopted a policy. Some of those reasons that I mentioned earlier that would be a lack of motivation for doing that are ones that were in evidence in this township. It's kind of odd, but they thought that by having a policy in some way that drew too much attention to the fact that they were developing a policy as opposed to maybe doing something active in terms of a project. So they chose to amend their ordinances, do some things that might give them an opportunity to do things like this. But so they have a project they call the 6th Street Extension Project. They've applied to PennDOT for multimodal grant funding to try to do some of these things. But it would involve a roundabout, as you can see at the center here, as depicted on this slide, the conceptual idea of how they would like to treat the 6th Street extension itself, which would involve, here again, enhanced crosswalks, perhaps a median to calm traffic, sidewalks on both sides, enhanced landscaping, a broad variety of things that will contribute to a complete streets environment in this location. So it's aspirational representation of what they hope to achieve. As examples of some of the things that they have done previously, I think these are good ideas, good representations of what their intent has been all along, but I think they're hopeful that the 6th Street project is going to take it to a new level in terms of what you see on these projects. The one on the right, it was an older, if you could see up close, the pavement is somewhat worn, so you can see this streetscape has been in place for quite some time. But it does contain street trees, sidewalk, a bike lane on one side. So they have had a good history in Warwick Township of doing these kinds of things. In the newer subdivision here, similar thing. This is on the left, traditional neighborhood development that's been developed in the township. And you can see that it's something that's much different than the slide in the middle where the buildings are up close to the street. There's a sidewalk. It might be hard to see here, but the parking lines are painted on one side of the street. So a number of elements that they've tried to build in as a good starting point in a suburban location. Now, Mountjoy Borough is an interesting situation because here is a case where the staff has been trying to make the case for complete streets for some time and has not been able to make the sale with Borough Council. Again, some of the reasons I mentioned earlier for not wanting to do this, I think in Mountjoy's case probably was as much financial, not wanting to commit themselves to things that they weren't ready to pay for. But the borough has long recognized that they have what they call an emerald necklace. They have parks and open space areas around the borough that they would like to be able to find ways for people to get to. So trying to make pedestrian connections to help do that, as well as to connect the existing neighborhoods within the borough, is their goal. So we funded, or will be funding, this is a project that's in the round of projects that we're just getting ready to fund, an implementation guide, because this will then put down on paper in a step-by-step way for Borough Council what it will take for them to get to the point of being able to implement the complete streets things that they want to do. And they'll know what they're getting into. They'll understand the commitment and the philosophy behind it. So the situations like these, on the left is just a snapshot from their official map, which shows areas that have been designated where they need improvements. I think the intersection on the right, in spite of the fact that there is some sidewalk on a couple of corners, I think you can see probably needs some work in order to improve the complete streets character of that location. On the left, you can see we have sidewalks that go for a couple hundred feet, but then essentially go nowhere. So these are examples of the locations where the borough would like to correct for those kind of deficiencies. So what does all that mean? In terms of how have we done and what's next? Mentioned earlier, this program in Lancaster County has only been in existence in 2014. We had some good early success. A few municipalities adopted a policy. We've developed a number of tools that we think are good tools for our municipalities to use. But I think now mainly the municipalities might see us as a funding stream and have kind of lost any other focus that we as a county at least have been trying to achieve. So we may need to redouble our efforts in terms of helping municipalities in the county understand what it is we're trying to accomplish. And I think some of that we'll be able to do as we issue forth with our new comprehensive plan, because that I think can help us reestablish some of that focus. But we do have current efforts like some of these that you see reflected in these projects that are largely a product of our community planners being out there week to week working with their municipalities and as project opportunities come along, doing small things that can help to implement complete streets. This year's workshop for Complete Streets, in fact, was focused on highlighting several municipalities in the county that, without a complete streets policy, have done specific things to implement complete streets. And there's a report of that workshop on our website that might have value for you. So if I were to grade us on what we've been able to do, if we reflect back on the first slide I had up here, which is plans, policies, programs, and projects, how have we done? And then maybe I'd be interested later on what you think our grade is. In terms of plans, I think I would give us an A-. We got plenty of plans. We do a good job of planning. Translating that into action, maybe, not so good. So on the policy level, reflecting that you see the examples I've shown you here, we have a few municipalities that have adopted policies. We haven't tried to go in and evaluate in each case where they've made changes to their ordinances that might be supporting complete streets and counting all those things. So I'd have to say on the policy level, I'd give us a C+. In terms of programs, the Complete Streets programs, like I said, had a good start, and we're kind of in neutral right now. Our Smart Growth Transportation program is alive and well. We're doing a good job of helping municipalities fund projects, so we get a B for our programs. And the projects themselves, I would give a B+. The city's project probably that I showed you here is an example of what would be on the higher end of the projects that are a product of our program. And the others all have their pluses, but I think we can still do a better job. So we have a lot of improvement to do. Overall grade for Lancaster County's Complete Streets program, I would give us a B. Still plenty of work to do in terms of reflecting that we have a handful of municipalities who have adopted policies. I think we need to do a better job of re-injecting some energy into the whole Complete Streets discussion, and we hope to be able to do that going forward. So with that, that wraps it up, and I think I thank you all for listening. I hope that there's some value in that, but just in terms of maybe being able to recognize yourselves up there in some way, in terms of some of the things that we've gone through in Lancaster County as we try to wrestle with this. So thanks for your time this morning, and I appreciate it.
Sorry. So we're running a little overtime, but I think it would definitely be worth it to take a few minutes to open this up to questions. And our tech setup isn't quite ideal, so if you can, when you ask your question, I'm going to ask whoever it's addressed to come up here, repeat the question into the mic, and then answer the question so we can get it on video. So I'm going to open that up. Does anyone have questions for our panelists?
Yeah, so the question was, what is the right way to do it? Resolution, policy, ordinance. Again, that's context sensitive, and what your municipality feels like it can handle. Like I gave the example in Pittsburgh where, and Philadelphia also took this approach, where the mayor of both cities started with an executive order. And that executive order, only did so much. And what it did was, in Pittsburgh, it instructed all of his staff who are working on their things to make sure to keep complete streets in mind, right? And so that is a policy on one level, but it went further and basically said, we want to form a more formal policy. So with the executive order, things like when they're coming up with plans for, say, plowing the streets, they also are thinking about how to plow or clear snow off of city-owned sidewalks and things like that. And then it went to be like, we want a policy that had actual teeth. And so with the policy in the city, that because there's so much development, they wanted to make sure to have a tool to work with developers on, for instance, when they're, as developers are putting forth plans to develop land in the city, as well as city city operations as well. So if they're going to be repaving a street, they need to start thinking through. So that's why it's kind of hard to say exactly what you need, because not every city has a development issue. Not every city is repaving streets as quickly, or whatever it might be. So I know that it didn't really answer your question, but I think that a good approach would be to see what other cities, municipalities are doing in your sort of size range, and just sort of stealing some of their policy, borrow some of their policy elements. Hope that answered your question on some level.
And I also just want to add that for any of our municipal folks here, I know that our Traveling Complete Streets partner crew would be happy to come to any of your municipalities and sit down with you and talk about your exact situation and what resources they can bring to it. So, do we have any other questions? I think that just to address that, I think our next segment will be helpful. We're going to talk about what people are doing around here, but also I know that Forest Hills is interested in Ardmore Boulevard and making that, when we were looking at that last slide, I was seeing a lot of comparisons from Ardmore to what they did in Lancaster. So I totally understand what you're saying, and I think that, again, we know it's case by case, and we know that we have 130 municipalities just in this county, and they're all really different, but we have these resources and we have this team, so give us a call. Yeah, please.
Yeah, I think what's, obviously we do have some difficulties with topography and connections and rivers and obstacles and all sorts of things. And through the Active Allegheny Grant Program, we're funding several different municipal looks where individual municipalities or groups of municipalities are doing a planning process. And ultimately what they might come out of it with is a complete streets plan, not necessarily a policy. For example, we have Wilkins Township. They're in progress right now for their active transportation plan. And they've been going through and identifying where they can even make those improvements. So they've already done an assessment. They're using a consultant. They've looked at where their bicycle and pedestrian origins and destinations are. They've been surveying their residents as far as where they would like to see bicycle and pedestrian improvements or transit access improvements. And they've identified, a few key corridors where they feel that they can and should make improvements. So they realize that they're not going to go back and retrofit their suburban neighborhoods with sidewalks, but they've identified, their top priorities for making connections, and that's what they're going to pursue in the future. So it's not impossible. I think, like it's been said, it's all about the context of your community and what those values and priorities are.
So take a break, chat, stretch your legs, and then we'll hear from our next panelist talking about complete streets at home. Thank you again to our panelists.